They said the baby shouldn't have lived. Not because of sickness, not because of hunger, but because of what was already written in its blood. The old nurses who still remember her birth whisper that they could feel something wrong the moment she arrived, that the room went cold, that the lights flickered, that every instinct in them said this child was not meant for this world. Her mother never looked anyone in the eye that night. She just kept staring at the wall, rocking back and forth, whispering a name that no one else understood. The father wasn't there. No one knew who he was, or maybe everyone did, and that was the real horror. Before we go deeper into this dark story, make sure to subscribe to American Shadow, the place where real American crime stories come to life. Hit the like button if you're hooked, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think about this case. It began in a small Appalachian town tucked between the hills where no one leaves and no one new arrives. A place forgotten by progress, where family trees don't branch. They coil. Every face looked the same, every surname repeated like an echo. They said it was God's country, but God hadn't been there in a long time. The girl who became a mother at 17 carried a secret that wasn't hers to keep. She said she didn't remember what happened, that one night she woke up in the field behind her family's cabin, her nightdress torn, her legs covered in dirt and pine needles. Her mother told her never to speak of it again. 9 months later, she gave birth to a baby that looked like no one could explain. Pale, almost translucent skin, eyes that didn't blink. The doctor, a man who had delivered half the county's children, refused to sign the birth certificate. He left town 2 weeks later and never came back. The child's cry, people said, didn't sound like a baby's key, more like something remembering pain. And yet, they all stayed silent, because in that valley, silence was survival, and they had all been silent before. They buried their history under quilts and hymns and Sunday suppers, but the blood never forgets, and in that blood was a truth older than the town itself, one that would crawl its way to the surface no matter how deep they tried to bury it. The girl's name was Lila Mae Turner. To outsiders, she was nothing more than a shy, pale thing who barely spoke above a whisper, but in town she was a Turner, and that name meant something. The Turners had lived on that same stretch of dirt for nearly 200 years, ever since their ancestor, Elias Turner, carved the family homestead into the hills after the Civil War. No one questioned how they survived so long with so little. No one asked why they never married outsiders, and no one dared mention the things found buried in the woods behind their property: bones, dolls, scraps of rope. Because in a place like that, asking questions meant becoming part of the story yourself. Lila Mae's family tree wasn't a tree at all. It was a circle. Cousins married cousins, brothers disappeared, and came back with wives no one remembered seeing before. The county records were half missing, eaten by mold and time. But what little remained painted a picture that made even seasoned genealogists uneasy. Every generation carried the same crooked jawline, the same grayish eyes, the same quietness that bordered on eerie. But the Turners called it the Lord's blessing. They said their bloodline was pure, chosen, untouched by the corruption of the outside world. By the time Lila turned 16, she had already buried 3 siblings, all infants, none of them living past their first year. Her mother said it was God's will, but the midwives whispered that the children had been born too strange to save, one with a twisted spine, one with no eyes, one that never made a sound. And yet the Turners kept trying, kept breeding within the family as if cursed to repeat the same sin over and over again. When Lila became pregnant, the whispers began again. Her mother claimed it was a miracle. Her grandfather, old and half-blind, muttered scripture under his breath whenever she entered the roads. And the town, what little of it there was, turned its face away, because everyone knew, even if no one said it out loud, that there were no strangers in Turner Hollow. If Lila was pregnant, the father had to be one of them. But who? When the baby came, no one came to visit. The family locked themselves inside the cabin for weeks. Smoke rose from the chimney every night, but no one ever saw the baby again. Not until the day the sheriff came knocking and found something in the crib that made him drop to his knees and pray. The sheriff, John Harper, had been in that town his whole life. He'd seen violence, poverty, hunger, but nothing like what he saw that morning. He said later that he couldn't even be sure it was a baby. The shape was wrong, the head too large, the limbs too small, the eyes were what haunted him most. They were open when he found it, glassy and unblinking, staring straight up at the ceiling as if waiting for someone only it could see. Lila sat in the corner, motionless, her skin so pale she looked carved from candle wax. Her mother was nowhere to be found. The house smelled of iron and rot, old blood, and something else, something sour, chemical, like earth disturbed too soon. When Harper asked what had happened, Lila didn't speak. She just began humming a tune he recognized, a lullaby his own grandmother used to sing, though he couldn't remember where she learned it. It was an old song, one that came from across the ocean, older than the town, older than the Turners themselves. The coroner refused to write a report. He said the child's features couldn't be classified. Bones didn't fit together the way they should. Teeth had grown where they shouldn't have. And in the tiny hand of the baby, there was something clenched. A lock of hair, thick and dark, not belonging to Lila or her family. When the sheriff sent it to the state lab, it came back with no match, no human record at all. The Turners said it was a punishment from God. The pastor called it blasphemy. But Harper, who'd spent his life believing in reason, started digging. He went through old county records, handwritten marriage logs, forgotten grave markers. The deeper he looked, the less sense any of it made. No birth certificates before 1900, no military records, no census entries that matched the number of people living there. It was as if the Turners existed outside time, growing, dying, replay, acing one another in secret. And then, in an old church ledger, Harper found something that made him stop breathing for a moment. An entry from 1874, written in faded ink. Child of Elias Turner and his daughter. The rest of the page had been torn out. Harper closed the book, and for the first time in his life, he understood why the people of that valley never left. Because they couldn't. Their blood wouldn't let them. After the sheriff's discovery, the town changed, but only in whispers. People stopped going near the Turner property. The road that led up the hill grew over with weeds. Kids dared each other to get close to the fence, but none ever did. Even the air seemed heavier there, like it remembered. And then, one by one, the Turners began to disappear. Lila was the first. One night, she simply vanished from her bed. Her grandfather said the Lord had taken her home, but Harper didn't believe that. He searched the woods for 3 days, dogs tracking a scent that led straight to the old family cemetery, a place few dared to visit. The graves had no names, just wooden crosses, worn smooth by decades of rain. He counted at least 30 of them, though some said there were more, buried deeper beneath the moss and clay. He noticed something else. Each grave was marked with the same symbol, carved faintly into the wood, a looping spiral, closing in on itself over and over again. He found it carved into the trees around the property too, etched into barn doors, even burned into the stone hearth inside the house. It wasn't a religious mark, it was older, primitive, almost tribal. Harper took a rubbing of it and sent it to a university researcher he knew, an expert in folklore. The man replied only once, with a single line, "That's not a symbol of worship, it's a warning." The townsfolk didn't talk about it, but they felt it. The way animals went missing, the way the soil refused to grow crops after the Turners were gone. Hunters said they heard crying at night, like a baby's wail carried on the wind. Others said they saw lights moving through the trees, slow and deliberate, like lanterns. But there hadn't been anyone living up there for months. And yet, one night, the old chimney started smoking again. When Harper climbed the hill to see for himself, he found the front door open, and the smell of burning flesh thick in the air. Inside the fireplace, something was burning, not wood, Not entirely. In the ashes, he saw a small object, a pacifier, melted into the soot. That was the night Sheriff Harper resigned. He packed his things and left the valley for good. But even after he was gone, people said they could hear him muttering in his sleep at the boarding house downstate. Just one phrase over and over again. The blood remembers. Years passed. The Turner house collapsed in on itself, swallowed by vines and silence. Locals said it was better that way, that some stories should stay buried, but legends don't rot. They fester. The tale of Lila May and her child turned into a whisper shared between drunks and preachers alike, a ghost story about sin and blood and punishment. Yet beneath all the superstition, pieces of truth still waited, tucked away in attics and courthouse basements, waiting for someone curious enough or foolish enough to find them. That someone was a graduate student named Rebecca Klein. She came from Chicago, chasing her dissertation on isolationist bloodlines in postbellum Appalachia. When she arrived in the county archives, she thought she'd found just another forgotten family. But the deeper she dug, the less sense it made. Whole decades missing from the census, marriage licenses signed by the same two names over and over, medical reports marked sealed by order of the county coroner, and, strangest of all, a birth record from 1952 labeled simply, Infant, Unknown Parentage, Turner blood confirmed. Rebecca followed the trail to the ruins of the old Turner homestead. What she found there shouldn't have survived the weather, but it had. Under a collapsed floorboard, she discovered a metal box wrapped in cloth. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, children, pale and frail, some smiling, some not, and in each one the same face seemed to repeat, the same eyes, the same jaw. It wasn't just resemblance, it was replication. Among the photographs was a diary, its pages swollen with moisture, but the ink still legible in places. One passage stopped her cold. The child hears them at night, the ones beneath. Their faces are ours. Rebecca didn't sleep that night. She took the box and left before sunrise, driving until the mountain disappeared in her rearview mirror. But a week later, she called the county sheriff's office from a motel 2 states away. Her voice, they said, was shaking. She told them she had blood test results that proved something impossible, that every Turner who ever lived, every generation back to the 1800s, shared more than just ancestry. They shared identical DNA. If you're still watching, the narrator whispers, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? That night, Rebecca disappeared. The box was found in her motel room, open, the photographs scattered across the floor. On the back of one of them, written in a trembling hand, were 3 words, "The child lives." Months after Rebecca's disappearance, a letter arrived at the county courthouse, no return address, postmarked from somewhere in West Virginia. Inside was a single sheet of yellowed paper, folded neatly, with only a few words written in typewriter ink. They're still here. They never left the valley. Attached to it was a photograph, black and white, blurred by motion. It showed what looked like a young woman standing at the tree line, half hidden in fog. Her face was indistinct, but the outline of her body, the slant of her head, the long braid down her back, they were unmistakable. It was Lila May, or someone who looked exactly like her. The sheriff's office dismissed it as a hoax, but locals began reporting strange sightings again, figures walking the ridge at night, faint music drifting through the forest, that same old lullaby, soft, off-key, carried on the wind, and then livestock started disappearing. Fields that had grown barren for decades suddenly showed signs of being tilled, as if someone, or something, was farming in secret. A trucker passing through the area claimed he picked up a hitchhiker late one night, barefoot, wearing a faded calico dress. He said she didn't speak at first, just stared out the window. When he asked where she was headed, she turned to him slowly and said, "Home." He dropped her off at the edge of Turner Hollow. The next morning, his truck was found abandoned on the same road. The doors open, the engine running, the driver's seat stained dark with something that wasn't oil. Locals said the Turners weren't human anymore, that after generations of folding in on themselves, something inside them had changed. Not just their bodies, but their minds. They became something older, something that remembered the first blood that walked this land before America had a name. Others whispered a darker theory, that the Turners had never been entirely human to begin with, and when the government finally sent surveyors to map that region years later, their report was quietly sealed. The only thing that ever leaked was one line from a field note, scribbled hastily in the margin. Evidence of continued habitation, but no identifiable dwellings. Voices heard near dusk. Sounded like children. They say the land forgets, but it doesn't. It holds memory like bone holds marrow. Deep, unseen, but always there. The valley where the Turners once lived is quiet now. The forest has taken back what belonged to it. Their house is gone, the graves sunken into the earth, the names erased by moss and rain. But sometimes when the fog settles low and the moon is thin, the air hums with that same low lullaby, the one that never seems to end. An old man who lives near the county line says he still sees them, not ghosts, people. Walking together just before dawn, pale faces moving without sound, eyes wide and unblinking. He swears they look the same as they did when he was a boy. And maybe they are the same, because whatever the Turners became, it wasn't bound by time. Their blood had folded in on itself too many times, and somewhere in that folding, they slipped out of what we call human. Decades after Lila Mae vanished, DNA from an unidentified woman was logged in a missing persons database. It matched the Turner profile perfectly. But the strange part, the match came from 3 separate missing women, all from different states, all decades apart. Each one shared that same impossible genetic pattern. The report was buried. The lab worker who filed it resigned the next day. Some say the Turners spread, that their blood found a way out of that hollow, that children born in cities far away, children who never even heard the name Turner, have dreams of a cabin in the hills, of a baby crying in the dark, of a woman humming softly beside a fire. They wake with dirt under their fingernails, mud on their feet. The story isn't over. Maybe it never will be. Because you can bury a house, you can burn a name, but you can't kill what's already growing inside you. And if you ever find yourself driving through those mountains, past a road with no sign and no reason to stop, you might hear it, a voice, faint but clear, singing from somewhere deep in the trees. Hush, little baby, don't say a word. The rest of the song, no one remembers. And maybe that's for the best, because some lullabies weren't meant to be finished.